I noticed that actually last time you come to CCG, I remember you were doing some exploratory, investigative, research and academic studies. We actually had the two professors talk to you. Now your book is coming out already. So you had a book of this River of Iron, Railroads and the Chinese Power in the Southeast Asia. You co-author with Selina Ho and Chun Win Kuk. So maybe, give us a bit of, I know you are very, productive, had many books before, but this book particularly, the most recent book, give a bit of a highlight and what it's about.
Well, I think the first thing to say is the book is about how China itself built a high-speed rail industry. And to make a very complicated story short, in about the year 2000, China didn't have a high-speed rail industry or a high-speed rail system. So the first part of the book describes how did China build the technology and the infrastructure for a high-speed rail system, and it's quite a story. So in building your high-speed rail system, you built a driver for many other parts, high-tech parts of your economy. So part of the first part of the story is how you built this industry. The second part of the book, therefore, is about how China is negotiating with 7 Southeast Asian countries on the continent, not to include Indonesia, how you're negotiating to build a system that will connect possibly the 7 Southeast Asian countries on the continent to the south of China and hook into the domestic system of China. Now, in describing how you're doing this, I want to I think it's a very important point that we make in the book. This idea of an interconnected Southeast Asia was not, with China, was not particularly a Chinese idea. In this particular case, the Southeast Asians, going back to the colonial powers, the French, the British in Southeast Asia, wanted to connect by rail to China, to penetrate inland China. So, but what China did do is build the industry, then got the capital, and now it's helping Southeast Asia build out this plan. In fact, the Southeast Asians came to Premier Zhu Rongji in around 1995, as I recall, or maybe I think he was vice premier then, and asked whether China would help finance railroad development in Southeast Asia. And Zhu Rongji said, no, we don't have the money or the technology, not the time for us. Well, a few years later, China did have the money and the technology, and now has been pushing forward. So the bulk of the book deals with China in negotiation with the Southeast Asian countries to gradually, build this system.
We talk about a lot of differences, a lot of disputes, a lot of different in values and things like that. But exactly the case like you studied, this connectivity, this infrastructure, not only to help your neighbors, but also help yourself. And if the war is really in that kind of mentality, let's help each other, let's build infrastructure for the next half a century. That will be probably the biggest pie for all countries to work on. And maybe we could even upgrade AIB to GIB, to Global Infrastructure Investment Bank. And maybe US and Japan should join that. And so what do you think about the prospect of let's have infrastructure, a global alliance or global bank of somehow, and US China should work on that, and B3W and BI should be combined in some fashion, maybe.
This is my personal view. I think the U.S. and others should say the world needs infrastructure. In many cases, we, the United States, or we, the Germans, or French, Italians, Canadians, have certain talents, and we should work together to build infrastructure. Now, I think in the case of Southeast Asia, it's close to China. China's the biggest trading partner for almost all Southeast Asian countries now. So I think it's natural that China will have a leading role in that set of infrastructure. But if we were talking about the Americas and knitting together even more Canada, US, and Mexico, I presume the United States would play a bigger role because it's closer to home. And of course, the Europeans will play a bigger role in the further integration of Europe. So my point is that I think China, the United States, the Europeans have, well, you might say their backyards or their economic natural communities. And therefore, you'll see more activity by China in Asia, more perhaps by the U.S. in our own country initially, and then in our region, and the same in Europe.
So what do you think about this BRI? I mean, China is doing railway in the Southeast Asia countries. It's kind of a maritime Silk Road, if you're using the Chinese term. They are trying to help building this connectivity, but the BRI, I mean, this is a scheme that China has been launching for 8 years now. Just 2 years ago, Central Government had a big meeting. Yeah. So what do you think of the prospect of BRI and how we can really work together? I mean, China doesn't want to work it by itself. It's the principle of that is jointly consulted, jointly build, and jointly benefit.
Of course, I would defer to you in particular and Chinese people in general. But it's my impression that BRI itself is evolving over time. That as China gets involved in more places around the world, more different kinds of infrastructure, some places China's operating are not very politically stable. Others are much more secure. China's learning lessons and also how to deal with different political systems, because it's very sensitive to build infrastructure in another political system because they're organized differently and you face indigenous groups of various sorts that might not like what's happening. So I think China's learning, and on balance, I think China's becoming a little more cautious. And as China's growth slows, which I think, generally speaking, over time it will, China will, and other needs for China domestically are big. So looking at the discussion in China, I think Chinese are themselves asking, how much of our national talent and resource and technology should we devote to outside of China versus inside of China? And even inside of China, how much to domestic needs versus military needs? So what I try to tell Western observers, at least as my understanding, is China debates about all these issues, and you're feeling your way towards sounder policy and not becoming overly committed financially. And it's always been my understanding that one reason China wanted the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank was to have others besides China finance a lot of this infrastructure. And frankly, I thought that was a pretty good idea. And I think the United States made, I will say, strategic error under the Obama administration not to join this. And in fact, when China drew up the charter for the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, it was an American lawyer that helped the Chinese do it, right? So all I would say is, yes, I think China will become more involved over time, but it will be, I think, increasingly careful. It will want to spread the risk to other countries beyond itself, and that we'll see China more constrained by competing demands for budget. So yes, it's going to go on. Yes, I think it will is and will continue to be very important. But it's still only going to be a small part of what the world needs.
Yeah, so that's why we are thinking, if this B3W and BRI can somehow work together, find a mechanism. I mean, B3W, as you said, China maybe already have investment, have some technology, infrastructure, capacity, and then B3W may be more on the legal and the other aspect, local condition may be more familiar because U.S. and Western multinationals are really interested in BRI and wants to work together, and also that we have of course this AIB, as you said, it's Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. Can we really set up a Belt and Road International Bank Alliance, like we should be led by, World Bank, AIB, ADB, FDB, Latin American development banks? Let's all the development banks work together for the infrastructure revolution and transformation for the next half century, so that we have a big pie to work on, and we don't have to do a lot of geopolitical competition.
These are the things I'd like to be talking about. But instead, we're talking about red lines, and we're talking about bad faith agreements and so forth. So we've got to get our dialogue to the point where we can start talking about the things that are very important. But I should, in all realism, say, I think the security frictions between our two countries, right at the moment, they're growing. And as long as our security relationship is a sort of more threat-oriented rather than opportunity-oriented, you're then going to find people, I think probably in China, but certainly in the U.S., say, how can we help China increase its connectivity to the rest of the world if we face a security threat? So I think the precondition to moving ahead on these good economic ideas is to get our security relationship under control. And frankly, it's not under control. I mean, it's not out of control yet, but it's certainly not under control.
Yeah, you're right. I think that the trust and mutual understanding we build up is very important. So this high level head of the state diplomacy, I mean, hopefully can stabilize the relation and even put the guardrails against those potential risks. That then we start those constructive dialogues. I mean, really, I hope that people in the commerce, in the treasury, in the economic, and probably the banks. I mean, AIB is already a good internationally acceptable model. 104 countries are member. All the Western members are in it, except US and Japan. So maybe we could, work on that. So what I think that your book, I mean, on this infrastructure in the iron, this iron rail in the Southeast Asia is really a case in point. That such a strong demand and needs for this infrastructure connectivity. So I really think that development banks and the U.S. aid and China International Development Cooperation Agency and CEDA and many other international agencies should work together, also with the development banks. And let's, through the UN, maybe somehow we find a way to connect the world with a massive infrastructure gradual build up, so that we can avoid, this kind of hot, war. Actually, I mean, because if we kept the geopolitical tension, we may end up, destroy the world. So I think you're right. I mean, the efforts, your research in this aspect, really bring the understanding of what China is doing in Southeast Asia, and to that matter to the world, how we can really work together.
Well, I think in that regard, there are small steps we can take. And I think the first small step, but it's actually going to be a pretty big step, is getting our people going back and forth, talking to each other again, in person, on a sustained basis. And so I think one of our top priorities in U.S.-China relations ought to be how can we sooner rather than later restore our person-to-person contact.
The trade war is still going on, and with U.S. and China and the tariff. So, what do you think of the possibility of the tariff coming down between China and the U.S.? So, what do you think of this economic ties that is really a great direction to work for, rather than we are trying to form AUKUS or those Quad security type of alliance? So it's a host of questions.
And I can't speak for the U.S. government. I have no special information, but I would certainly note they didn't seem to be very prominent in the discussion between our two presidents. Certainly publicly, nothing encouraging that I've heard has been said about tariffs. And frankly, going into elections in the United States and the importance of congressional support, I think right now there is very little support for tariff reduction here. Certainly some industries and economists would like tariff reductions, but I don't think that's the let us say, the prevailing sentiment in certainly the Democratic Party. So, I think we ought to move ahead on improving our own economic policy. I think we ought to negotiate with China to the phase one trade deal and reducing tariffs. But once again, the domestic environment's not very conducive to that at the moment.